I really don't know how to begin this story or how to describe it. It's just an unusual circumstance, series of circumstances involving a very ambitious, talented young man and a very dangerous warlord. I've met some dangerous people in my life. Met some that are dangerous and good. And you say, how can that be? They're a fearsome foe to their enemies. Their enemies are bad people. This man is just dangerous and is still causing, the last I saw, still causing trouble. He had been at the head of a genocidal civil war, a civil war within a civil war. And years after the events that I'm about to relate, he fomented another genocidal civil war. But there's an old expression, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and at the time of this story, he was an ally, a dangerous ally, but an ally. But before that, I have to go back further. Cut. We're going to start over. Start over. Let's. I have two nephews. Now, I have other nephews. I have several nephews by my brother and sister, but it's not what I'm talking about. I have two Sudanese nephews, two Nilotic nephews, two nephews that you would not think are my nephews. But you have to understand the culture, the Nilotic culture of East Africa, the Nile Valley, the Upper Nile Valley. Not the culture of the equatorial Africa and sub-equatorial Africa, the unique culture of the Nilotic, the Shilluk, the Nuer, and the Jang, and the Acholi. But especially the Nuer and the Jang. The Nuer and the Jang have been fighting for more than 1,000 years. The Jang don't want to fight, but they're the majority. They tend to run things. In all likelihood, Shishak, who ruled Egypt for a while and invaded as far as Jerusalem, was very likely a Jang. They're rulers, they're leaders. And then there's the Nuer, the second largest tribe. The Nuer have one most important desire above all else, and that is to eliminate the Jang from the face of the earth. And every generation or so, they rise up and attempt it, get the snot beat out of them, and tell tales of how horrible it was to their children, who then will rise up again. Been going on for 1,000 years or more. Some say 4,000 years. But I have two nephews, and one is a Nuer and one is a Jang. How do I have these nephews? Because in Nilotic culture, you can adopt a nephew. More likely, nephews will adopt an uncle. These Nilotic cultures, for tribal unity, rather than focus on the nuclear family as we do, to raise the children, they rely on the uncles. And they have a complex and rigid system whereby for a certain period of a boy's life, he is raised by his maternal uncle. And for a certain period of a boy's life, he's raised by a paternal uncle, his father's brother. And it brings the tribe an amazing unity. But what does an orphan do? And this is a story of orphans. Because the genocidal war of the Arab North against the black Southerners robbed many children of their fathers and their uncles. So, I've told the story of the Lost Boys in another video, and how I was involved in a video project. So as I talk about my Jang nephew, we'll start there. The most interesting character in the video that the group of us together, each with doing our own part, created, produced, about the refugees known as the Lost Boys, was a fellow by the name of Paul Machar, who, at the time of the video was made, was about 14 years old, was living in the Kakuma refugee camp, and he was interviewed in the church that he had largely started. And he told the story of the school he had started. He wanted an education, and there was none to be found in the refugee camp, and so he had created a school. Come up with a merchandising business that boys, young boys, elementary age boys could make a little bit of money, pool their money together. And having pooled their money together, they had enough for the salary for a school teacher. And they started a school so that they could learn. And the organizer was Paul Machar. And so here he was telling all about what was going on in the camp and all about the refugee situation and the Lost Boys, and very clearly and eloquently with these Coke bottle glasses. His vision is terrible. He still wears Coke bottle glasses. A few years later, visited the friend that had been the chief instigator of that video. And there, sitting on the couch, was Paul Machar. He had gotten his refugee visa to the United States. He went on to college, went to Lipscomb University. I may have had a little bit of a hand in talking to the administration about getting him in. I don't remember. I think I may have said a good word for him. But one thing and another, and he asked if I would be his uncle. And I've been his uncle ever since. I just talked to him on the phone a few days ago. He's gone on, gotten his ordination in the Anglican Church of South Sudan. He's a leader of the refugee community around the world. And he's also running in the 2024 election. He's running for president of South Sudan. I think he's got a good chance. I do think he's got a good chance, and if he wins, he'll be a good president for that country. And I've been helping him out. That's my Jang nephew. God is so good. God is so good to have put together all the little pieces, lined up all the dominoes in a row so that I would become an uncle to Paul Machar. But I've spoken of the lost boys and of getting refugee visas. The United States State Department began handing out refugee visas and plane tickets to the lost boys after the 60 Minutes video got the attention of so many senators and representatives in Congress. And they brought several thousand of them to the United States. And they have these programs, the State Department does, for resettlement. And they give out grants to civilian organizations to help with the resettlement. And my friends that I did the video also gotten one of these grants to help with the resettlement, and they asked me to be part of it. So they were doing workshops, basically monthly workshops on how to live in America. You know, there's one focused on how to get a good education. There was one focused on what to do concerning girls and what not to do. Customs are different, and you need to know that. And all sorts of things. Each month different. But I was there in Nashville. I would go down every month, and I was there for one. I was made a group leader. We had all these groups and all these longtime USA citizen residents, one for each group, to give our perspective, what it's like to live in America. And this was about vocations, careers, setting your goals for a career. So I had this group and asked, what are your goals? That was the little sheet of questions. So I asked the first question, what are your goals? What's your career goal? There was a young man in the group, I always remember him. His name was Riek. He was a new heir. Riek said, my goal is I'm going to be the general manager of the international airport in Juba, when South Sudan becomes a free nation. Juba was the regional capital. It's now the national capital of South Sudan. It's a long story. It should be another city, but that's beside the point. But back then there was a war going on. Sudan People's Liberation Army against the Sudan Armed Forces. He said, when the peace comes, I will be that manager. Well, how are you going to accomplish that? We said, well, I'm getting a bachelor's degree in airport management from Middle Tennessee State University. I just started classes 6 weeks ago. Okay. I'm thinking, you might want to set your sights a little bit lower. That's a bit impossible. They're not going to hire some kid, and knowing international agencies, they're not going to hire a native of the land. They're not going to hire a black man. It just, I'm not talking about systemic racism in the United States, which is not real. I'm talking about the systemic racism in the United Nations bureaucracy, which is very real. Okay. So, ain't happening. But I didn't say anything. I kept buttoned my lip. That was that. We had our little discussion. Well, a few years passed, 4 or 5 years passed, and the CPA, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, was signed, and I get a phone call, would you come with us to photo document the inauguration of Dr. John Garang as president of the new autonomous region of South Sudan and as vice president of Sudan. First vice president of Sudan, in Khartoum, week after next. Yeah, right. Well, it wasn't quite week after next, but it was almost that close. A lot of scurrying around. This time I agreed to go. I'd never been to Africa. A lot of scurrying around. So we had a letter, and I had a copy of the letter, and the letter said, "You're invited to the inauguration." It had my name on it, a list of 6 names. It was an honor to be invited to a national inauguration. I actually got to sit in the front row. That's another story. It's largely documented in my video the day I met Hamza bin Laden. But, because I did go to Khartoum, but there on that list of names was Riek's name. He was going with us. So I got there, and sure enough, he had graduated with his bachelor's degree in airport management. By then I had learned that Middle Tennessee State University is the #1 aviation university in the country, has the best aviation curriculum in the country, better even than Ridley. So he had a good degree. So we get shipped out of Khartoum for our own safety at the end of the inauguration and dropped into Rumbek, which is the middle of flipping nowhere, in the middle of South Sudan. Has a dirt airstrip that they land jets on, Russian jets that are made for that sort of thing. Now I'm not talking about fighters, I'm talking about cargo planes. When we were about to fly in, they said, someone told us that there's a rumor that the entire airstrip in Rumbek was full of potholes. But someone else corrected that rumor and said, no, it is not true that the airstrip in Rumbek is full of potholes. It doesn't have potholes, they said. It has fish ponds. Yeah, they're that big, the holes. But we landed there and we didn't die. And I'm sitting there talking to Riek, and he went and talked to some people on the cabinet of the new government of the soon-to-be government of South Sudan. It wasn't officially the government yet. And he got a piece of paper that said he had been appointed the general manager of the Rumbek airstrip. Next day, he comes to us very dejected. He'd been thrown out of the airport. They had not honored his letter. Now, I'm going to go back a few hours. A few hours before that, I had met somebody. Now, I was meeting all kinds of cabinet ministers. They weren't cabinet ministers yet, but they were cabinet minister designees. I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of how governments are formed. That will be for another video, which by the time you see this is probably made, so look up there and, you know, the whole thing. But I had met a warlord named Riek Machar, who was designated for an important position in the new government. He was going to be the new governor of the state within South Sudan of Equatoria or West Equatoria or something. It's where, but he was going to be headquartered in a city called Ye. Yes, they have a city called Ye, and they also have a city called Wow. Go figure. But I had met this guy. Just, you know, handshakes all around. Okay. But I knew he was dangerous. I knew he was very dangerous. He's a warlord. So when Riek came to me, I went, I knew what I had to do. Because I had been officially introduced as somebody important. And I was somebody important. I was the Bush brother. Check the other video. So that evening when Riek Machar sat in his circle of people, his guards and his important people in his warlord circle, drinking Tusker, I walked over there and said, the guard came up to me and said, I would like to speak to Riek Machar, if it's possible. So I was ushered over there and I said, Riek, I would like to have a few words with you, something I think is of interest to you. So he waved me to a seat, offered me a beer, and I said, I'll take a soft drink. And one of his men went and bought me a knee-high. They have a knee-high in East Africa, still. It's gone in America. Well, I sat there drinking my knee-high and telling the tale of Riek being rejected by the UN contractors who ran the airstrip. I said, Riek, this is what happened, and my concern is that that is a disrespect to the new government of South Sudan. Not only that, it's a disrespect to the Nuer tribe, which makes it a disrespect to you personally. He nodded his head that was true. And I said, I am Riek's uncle, which is why I'm advocating for him. Now, Riek was sitting there next to me, being very, very nervous. I mean, he was scared. He's not a cowardly man. He's a very brave man. But in his culture, for him to be that close to a man of that stature was a tremendous impertinence on his part. So it was legitimate for him to be scared. I mean, all that Riek needed to do was to nod his head a certain way, and we would have been vulture food by the next morning. That's the kind of man he is. That's the kind of followers he has. It was legitimate to be scared, but he's just sitting there, you know. Me? I was scared. I mean, I was really scared. I knew that I had put my life on the line. I knew that I had not a huge chance, but I had a better than 10% chance of getting dead from my impertinence. The circumstances warranted that risk. So I said all this to Riek, and then I said, I'm Riek's uncle, but I'm a white man from America. What do I know about being a Nuer uncle? He needs a Nuer uncle. And I know this is a huge thing to ask, but would you be his uncle? And he said, I will. Then he turned to Riek and said, you go there to the airport and you sit in a corner. You do not let them throw you out. If they throw you out, you come to me or my men. We'll take care of it. Take care of it is a pretty severe thing with Riek Machar. But you learn from them. Stay out of their way. Don't make trouble. And when I go to Ye, you follow me there. Well, he never went to Ye because everything changed in the politics of South Sudan because of the death of Dr. John Garang a few days later, but that's another story. But I lost track of all that until I looked up online a few years ago about some events at the airport in Juba, which was by then the capital of the new nation of South Sudan. And Riek Machar was the vice president of South Sudan. And in the article, it spoke of the general manager, whose name was Riek, at the airport. Shook my head and said, well, daggone. Should have believed the kid. That would be the end of the story, except for one other thing. My one nephew is running for presidency of South Sudan, and one of the names that has been mentioned as a possible vice presidential candidate with him is my other nephew, the new heir nephew, Riek. Who knows? In 3 years, I might have my two nephews as the president and vice president of a nation. Now that would be something, wouldn't it?